From the Homestead Studios in Santa Clarita, California, it's just the Tip-Sters with Melissa Morgan.
Greetings.
If you've got a tip for Melissa, a true crime you've got a lead on, a cold case you can warm up, what that stuff is in that thing, you know, that thing, anything, tell us about it by calling the Tip-Ster hotline at 832-TIPSTER. That's 832-847-7837, or send an email to jttipsters@gmail.com. You just might hear your tip on the podcast. And now here's your host, walking through the valley of the shadow of death with a crucifix in one hand and a Hello Kitty flashlight in the other, Melissa Morgan.
So much more cowbell. Producer Mark, sometimes I have to call into account the erroneous things you say. It would be a simple cross and not a crucifix.
Oh. And
it would not be a Hello Kitty flashlight. It would be some form of purple.
Right. Oh, they don't make purple Hello Kitties?
I know it's not something you know a whole lot about, but a lot of her things are pink. Pink and white. She's like white, and she has a lot of pink accessories. Occasionally a black splash of color, like one of her hair bows, even though she doesn't have hair.
Right.
I'm not sure how her bows stick to her little fur head.
Well, she's magical. She's the Hello Kitty. Come on.
Right. I was trying to remember. There was some sort of controversy several years ago when the Sanrio, or whoever the manufacturer was, came out and said Hello Kitty was a boy. Is that right?
Right, they did.
Yeah.
That was a big mistake.
Even though he wears a bow in his hair.
Yeah. Well,
we can't even get like our boy dog to wear like a bandana around his neck, which is, masculine enough, but
there's nothing wrong with, expressing yourself.
Yes. Being very much in touch with your male and female side.
That's right.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
Absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Not a thing, I don't think. But
right.
yeah, I appreciate the fact that I'm walking through the shadow of the valley of death with a cross and a Hello Kitty flashlight, but it would just be probably purple.
More of a purple.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I appreciate the thought, but yeah, not really a big Hello Kitty fan.
Well, I guess it helps.
The juxtaposition. I did appreciate the verbal juxtaposition because that's kind of funny. A crucifix and a Hello Kitty flashlight.
Our audience should know I try to surprise you with the intros every time. I never tell you what they're going to be.
You do. No, and you don't know much of what is going to come out of my mouth.
Well, that's true.
For sure. That's actually everyone in my life, not just you. But
that's what makes you special. That's why we love you.
It didn't sound like you meant that, honestly.
Well, that's why we love you.
Okay,
no, it's absolutely true.
Okay, all right, sure, whatever. So, this is a rare occasion where via you, I became a pretty close observer of a pretty awful murder case. And if I had not already known I wanted to spend the rest of my life with you, after this incident, I was like, oh yeah, I can never leave this guy. He's got this great shit going on. So to catch up any of the tipsters who are not sure what the fuck is happening right now, Producer Mark is so much more than a producer. He is not just the producer of this podcast. He's not just a husband and a dog father and a wonderful friend and a great neighbor. He is a Renaissance man, and he is a singer-songwriter. He is a record company executive. He will call it a co-op, saying that the artists all kind of contribute, but there are, I think, is it 11 artists on the label?
I think 11 or 12.
I think 11 or 12 artists on the label that he started 25 years ago?
Let's see, 25, 20, yeah, something like that.
Yeah, a long time ago as a record production company for himself when he was a touring singer-songwriter, and times change and music styles change, and his wants and desires changed, and he is not only a fantastic podcast producer, I'm going to cry. So he's not only a masterful singer-songwriter, he is, in my opinion, the Phil Spector of folk music, minus murdering women he brings to his house, I hope.
You told me you weren't going to mention that.
He has such an ear for, I mean, this is why this was one thing he does. He makes this podcast sound so good. And he has such an amazing ear. The artists that he produces their recordings, he gets out of them performances that they didn't even know they had in them. He works with people he respects and appreciates their level of mastery of their own words and music and their ability to express their words and music. But he brings out of them something they didn't know they had. And I've seen it firsthand at our house with giant wads of chords strung down the hallway.
Yeah, that part you weren't a big fan of.
No, I would try to leave the house. A drum kit in the master retreat of our bedroom with the amazing Albie Minacci on it and the masterful Chad Watson on bass and Dave Morrison walking up and down the halls with the guitar, singing and sounding, better than he ever has because he knows he's in good hands with Mark. So Mark is all of that and a bag of chips. And the entire time he has been working in the music world, he has had this wonderful job at a wonderful company, a developer, home builder, and commercial property owner. And he started in the mailroom and moved up.
I started in the file room.
File room. I always say mailroom.
Well, I've worked in mail rooms, so I have worked in many mail
rooms.
rooms.
You have worked in many mail rooms, including LFP, Larry Flint Publications.
Oh, that's for another day.
Yeah, it's for definitely another day. But he started in the file room and worked his way up and became a paralegal, sort of grandfathered in. And now, all these years later, he is the vice president of litigation and risk management for this developer. And he is, he's a rock star, and not just because he's my husband and producer Mark. That's just who he is. He's just a rock star. So that's the longest introduction ever for the most fascinating murder. So we purchased our first house in July of 2007. Cautionary tale, kids. Don't do it. Just don't even buy a house. But we bought our first house just as the market was going to crash like it was times in 29.
Yeah, I would say the cautionary tales, just don't buy a house when the radio is saying don't buy a house, which is exactly what we did.
I didn't listen to the radio, I guess, because I didn't know that we weren't supposed to buy a house then.
It was not a good time to be buying a house. We were saying, no. But.
Well, I remember talking to our realtor, and I said, well, aren't house prices dropping in the San Fernando Valley? And he goes, yeah, not up here. 1 month later, literally 1 month after closing.
Sound of bomb dropping.
It was Hiroshima in a big way. So we bought our first house in this lovely bedroom community of Los Angeles, Santa Clarita. It's a little far away from Mark's office. It's a little far away from everything unless you just want to spend all your days at Magic Mountain, Six Flags Magic Mountain. So we love the house. It's bigger and more beautiful than anything we thought would be our starter house. It's not a starter house, as my wonderful friend Bridget said. She's like, do you understand this is not a starter house? This is a dream house. So we love our house. And we had been here... even though we closed escrow in July, the previous owners needed time in the house while their house was being built, so we did not move in until October of 2007. So a scant, 10 months later, July 28th of 2008, producer Mark, vice president of litigation and risk management, comes home for dinner at sometime between 6:30 and 7. And he is... I remember this to this day. He had on a dark colored shirt and still had his tie on. He had loosened his tie, but we were sitting down to dinner, and it was almost like his thigh muscles were lowering him to his seat, and ring, ring. He wasn't even seated, and plates of food are sitting in front of us, and I hear, yeah, okay. And he hangs up and he's like, I gotta go. There's been a murder at the Twin Towers. I can't remember what they're called, but not the Twin Towers in New York, but the towers that his company owns in Century City. And he gets up and I was like, well, you do fucking know I'm coming with you, right?
And she did say that.
I probably did.
No, you did. You said that. Well, I don't know if you put the fucking in there, but you said you did. I did say, I'm going with you, right?
And I don't even think you knew I was alive. You were just so focused on, I have to get there and I have to get this taken care of. Because he, was the risk manager. It's, a large part of his job, managing the risk. So we drive to Century City, and how many floors are on each tower?
23.
23, two towers of 23 floors each. A lot of attorneys, a lot of things like that are housed in these beautiful towers. And we pull up, and everything's police taped off. A lot of police tape. And the building is locked down. No one can leave or enter. And we pull into the carriage area where I guess you could drop people off. And this was the dichotomy of the evening, where one person could not have given less of a shit of who Mark is, and the other end of it was one of those moments that I will remember forever. So the beat cop who is directing everyone around the building, Mark pulls up and he's like, "I'm the risk manager for this business," and the cop's like, "I don't care who you are, you can't park here." So we got a hold of the general manager of the building, and she said, park here, park here. So we ended up pulling around to another place and parked, got in the building, and I was like, where am I going to go? Because Mark has stuff to do. He's busy. And ironically, my friend Taylor worked at the time for an attorney in that building, for a very large law firm, entertainment law firm in that building. And she was working late, as she almost always does. And there were not that many people left in the building. It was, kind of after hours for a lot of people. And she was the only one left in her law firm. And I went upstairs to her law firm, and we sat in one of the offices watching the Kira Sedgwick TNT show, The Closer, and eating old frost-covered ice cream from the employee kitchen. And
wow, that's... At that point, you're probably not that glad you went with me, but
I was still fascinated. So Taylor and I are like, it was like a weird late evening pajama party with no pajamas. I was like, oh my God, I wonder what's going on. At one point, I can't remember if you texted me or what happened later in the evening after a lot of this had happened. Here's the other part that I will remember for the rest of my life. I went upstairs, and a flurry of activity. Do you remember what office you were in? Were you in the...
We're in the office of the building.
Office of the building. Mm-hmm. And flurry of activity, uniformed police officers, street clothes detectives, so much going on. And a detective wearing a fedora, who I just madly fell in love with, Detective Eric Spear. He was an imposing figure. He wasn't a huge man, but he has a presence. And he was kind of standing at the glass doors, and I opened them up, and he's like, "And who are you?" And I said, I'm the wife of Mark Humphreys. He's the risk manager." And he's like, "Good enough for me," and ushered me right in. And I was like, "Oh, that's kind of awesome."
Yeah, that was nice.
I
didn't know that he had. I guess I'd shaken his hand. That was it.
Yeah, you made an impression, because he's like, "Good enough for me," and ushered me in. And I was like, oh, and it got more interesting as the evening went on. So let's backtrack a little to how we got to the business towers and why. So as Mark's butt is about to hit the chair and his phone rings, there's been a murder at the towers, and we get there and we don't exactly know what's happened. At first, we think it's a robbery, which is very odd for Century City. It's a very safe, if you're going to get robbed in Century City, it's probably because you own a jewelry store and someone has, it's like Ocean's 15. People have figured out a way to break in. It's not a real crime-ridden area.
And there's no murders that go on.
It was the first murder in 20 years. It had been 20 years since the last murder in Century City. That's pretty big right there. That's a big statistic right there. So it was unfolding in an odd way that this woman who, basically had her head almost cut off, Very, very similar to the Nicole Brown Simpson. You know, she'd been almost decapitated. She was on the third floor of the parking structure, and ironically, you'll find out that this was done badly from step one. Very few murders are, you know, beautifully planned out, thank God, and most of them, you know, at least get solved, if not the ones that are, you know, missing and we don't know if they've been murdered or missing on their own. But this was just like, oh, could you have fucked up any more? Could you, what the fuck is happening? There were many witnesses, some far away because it was up three floors up. They could see from other buildings. There's a lot of information here. So what I think we should do, because I think it's beautifully told, and this story was covered in 2012, January of 2012 by Dateline NBC. And it is, I believe it would be the 10th anniversary this year, in July of 2018.
Yep.
CNBC did a series called The Deadly Rich, and it was covered in this series. And this story was covered in that series, and they did I think a really good job. So I think the best way to probably start this off is the description of the person who I think ended up being really close to the situation is Edwin Rivera. So can you hit clip 1, producer Mark?
July 28 of 2008 started as a regular working day. You know, I went to work, got out of work at 5:30 in the afternoon, went to my car. At exactly the moment that I was going to turn my engine on, I heard the first scream. At the moment, I said, well, somebody's playing a joke on somebody. Then the second scream came. You could tell that it was not a joke anymore. Somebody jumped into the car, and the car took off. I started chasing the car, started yelling, you know, get the license plate. And at the same time, I'm looking for this person that was screaming.
Hi, this is Beverly Hills at 1925 Century Park East. You have a male beating a female on the third level of the parking structure.
I looked and I just saw a pile, like a pile of clothes, you know, like when you're going to do your laundry and you put all the clothes. And, you know, I couldn't figure it out, you know. Then I said, what is that? I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And she turned around and looked at me. Her hair was dripping, you know. I could see her blood just dripping from her hair. And her eyes were the only thing that wasn't covered with blood. Her eyes were wide open. You could see the fear in her eyes. She looked at me and it felt like her stare, you know, where went right through me. That I'll never forget.
So Mr. Rivera is a really good witness, and some of the details that I had forgotten, I thought that she had been stabbed in the body. I had totally forgotten that it was mostly, she had been stabbed in the chest and the neck, but it was mostly above the chest that the deepest fatal wounds were enacted. And there were other witnesses who saw things. At one point, Pamela was bent over the edge of the parking structure. That was seen from another building. It was reported that it was a man beating a woman because they saw hands moving in a roundhouse circular manner. It was stabbing over and over again. We didn't know that at the time. She was eventually reported to have been stabbed 13 times.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. And I actually talked to Mr. Rivera that night. He had just finished speaking with the detectives, and I was sitting on a sofa outside the office where they were talking to witnesses. and trying to make sure that there's anything that they needed or whatever. And he came out and he told me pretty much the same story, but how she kind of died in his arms, and it was...
Yeah, there were several people who came to her aid. I think Mr. Rivera, and everything happens for a reason, timing-wise. I had thought that it had happened earlier, and as it turned out, Mr. Rivera gets out of his office at 5:30, but sat in his car for 25 minutes waiting for traffic to die down. So he did not want to leave until after 6, and she was pronounced deceased at 6:43.
Oh man! Wow.
So it happened later, and I believe that it happened later because the offices were closing, and her meeting at her family law attorney's office, excuse me, had ended. So that's why Mr. Rivera was there. So a slightly, more detailed version of what he saw was, he'd left his office at 5:30. He walked up to the third floor of the parking structure. But on the first floor, he had noticed a red SUV that was parked in the space closest to the building entrance. And that's usually where a green car parked. And I don't know who the green car belonged to, but when you work in an office building and you see the same thing every day and you notice something different, you're like, oh, that's different. So this red SUV was parked on the first floor. So he actually noticed the driver sitting in the red SUV parked on the first floor, and he was gripping the steering wheel really tight at 5:30. He was wearing a black long sleeve hoodie, and he said, I felt like it was kind of unusual because it was 90 degrees and kind of humid. So he couldn't tell if the driver was male or female because the hoodie was covering everything. So he walked, instead of taking the elevator, he walked up to the third floor where he always parked his car. And he sat there for 25 minutes waiting for the traffic to die down before he drove home. And as he was getting ready to leave, as he said in his audio clip, he was about to turn his car on. And he heard screaming, and he thought, someone's playing a joke on me. This is kids. And then he heard a second scream, and no, 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 no. And he got out of his car, and he thought, what's going on? And he heard a third scream, and even in a parking structure where, sounds echo, he decided to head toward the scream. And he rounded the front of his car, and he saw that red SUV from the first floor had moved up to the third floor and was parked behind a black SUV. And he moved toward the red SUV where the screams were coming, and he saw a tall, skinny man jump out from behind the black SUV and get into the red SUV and speed away. And as he says in his in the audio version, he says, I was like, hey, get that driver's license, and he doesn't even know why, but he knows something's happened. And the red SUV, sped past him, and he started chasing it on foot, but he turns around and runs back toward the black SUV, and he sees a woman covered in blood crouched between the two vehicles. And it must have just happened because he's shocked into stopping, and Pamela is still able to move, and she walked towards him and said, please help me, please don't let me die. And he told her to sit down, and he's like, I will get help. And he's yelling for anyone to call an ambulance, to call 911. He turns back around, and by then she's already laying down on the ground. She can't even sit anymore, and she's struggling to breathe. And there's a gargling sound coming from her neck, and he realizes that it's a really big, deep wound. And he runs to the railing and starts screaming for help, the same railing she had been bent over in the struggle for her life just minutes before. So she's pronounced dead at 6:43. She had multiple stab wounds to her head, neck, and chest, as well as many defensive wounds to her arms. She fought hard, and the fatal wound was the deep cut to the front of the neck, the kill wound. So there were other witnesses too. The one I remember the most was Matthias Steele, who said that he got off the elevator, the third floor. He saw Pamela laying on the ground, and he took off his shirt and wrapped it around her neck. I remember him very clearly. Another woman Deborah Thomas looked up from her car, saw Pamela Fayed on the ground. She yelled for someone to call 911, and she was relaying the information to the caller about what had happened. The other person I remember pretty clearly was a man named Matthew Grode, who worked across the street. And he saw Pamela, reaching over the ledge of the parking structure, hanging over the ledge of the parking structure. And he saw someone in a dark hoodie on top of her, attacking her with both arms in that circular motion, and her trying to resist. That's probably where the defensive wounds in her arms show up. He then sees the assailant pull Pamela backwards out of his view, and then he doesn't know where they go from there because he can't see, but he does notice that there's now blood dripping off the ledge of the parking structure. So, going backward, what the fuck happened? Pamela Fayed has a beautiful daughter, Desiree, with her first husband, and she marries her second husband, James Fayed, and they have a daughter who's at the time underage, so we don't really know her name at this point, but I can tell you her older sister is a pretty fantastic sibling because she was named the person in charge of her mother's affairs after her mother's death, and she was 18, and she grew up in a big, fast way.
Yeah, she had just turned 18.
Yep, she had just turned 18. So when she's a little girl, her mom marries James Fayed, and they live in an apartment, and they start this business, Goldfinger Coin and Bullion in Camarillo. And it's so weird because just a couple of episodes ago, I was singing Goldfinger, which I have the desire to sing every time I mention their business, Goldfinger, but I won't sing it. So they start this business, and it does really well. They maintain accounts for customers that are funded with US dollars, gold, or silver. So even his stepdaughter, Desiree, worked as a customer service representative in her teens, probably just answering the phone. So Goldfinger becomes successful, and the Fayeds purchase this large house in Camarillo, and then they purchase a 200-acre ranch in Moore Park. And it's big and beautiful main house and a guest house, which Jose Moya, who comes to the family in such a unique way and it says so much about Pamela. It's just heartbreaking the way this turned out. So her friend, Christina Holland, Pamela's friend, Christina Holland, her decades-long friend, has insight as to how Joey, Jose Moya, came to be an employee of Goldfinger and the Fayeds. Could you hit clip number 3, producer Mark?
We knew Joey, the ranch hand, as Joey, and my understanding is his actual legal name was Jose Moya. My story that I remember was just driving around Moore Park, and there was this guy that she had seen multiple times, and true to Pam's style, she realized he kind of needed a place and needed help. So what does Pam do? She reaches out to him and hires him.
So remember the name Jose Moya, who is now living in the guest house on their 200-acre ranch. He no longer works exclusively for Goldfinger. He's more like the general manager of the Fayed's properties and ranch. It's more of a general manager, ranch manager kind of a job. And he's been with them for several years. He started working for them in 2004. So he's been there for, 4 years when this terrible thing happens. So there's a lot. This is a very layered, awful case. Mark's close relationship to it notwithstanding, there's a lot of players, stupidly. There's a lot going on. When you own a business that deals with this kind of money, there's a lot going on here. So in 2007, Pamela decides that she wants to divorce James. Things are bad. He's very controlling. Things are not good. She's not happy. And he is having numerous affairs. In January of 2008, Robert Brooks was the CIO, or Chief Information Officer of Goldfinger, and he's responsible for information security. He had actually completed the installation of the network for the company, and remember, they have clients all over the globe. And as part of his job, he also made withdrawals from automated teller machines to test how much money they could launder, which was typically $800 per withdrawal per bank. So he kept...
Oh, I didn't know this part.
Yeah, they were money laundering. That's why things went as bad as they did. Divorce and money and a bad man.
And crime.
Many bad men, put it that way. So he kept records of all of the withdrawals, and then he would return the money and the receipts to James Fayed. So in May or June, I don't know if the records are not clear, James Fayed asked Robert Brooks to withdraw an aggregate amount of $26,000. Just remember $26,000, and give it to Jose Moya. And then he was supposed to give it to James Fayed. So Brooks withdrew the money, and he put it in a cardboard box and sealed it with security tape and gave it to Jose Moya to give to James Fayed. And Fayed later confirmed to Brooks that he had received the money. So, month and a half, 2 months before Pamela Fayed ends up with her head mostly dislodged from her body in the parking structure in Century City, $26,000 has been given to Jose Moya under the auspices of giving it to James Fayed in their money laundering scheme.
So, in other words, Fayed didn't really get it from Moya. Moya kept it.
Well,
we think.
Spoiler alert. Thanks for ruining that, producer Mark. No, it's fine. That's fine. So here's another name I'm throwing at you, because there's so many names in this. It takes a village to be a monster, I guess. So Delilah Urea met the Fayeds when they had lived in her condo in the early 2000s, when they had just gotten married. They hadn't even had their second daughter. They just had the daughter and the stepdaughter together. And then she started working for the Goldfinger Corporation in customer service in 2003. And then in July of 2008, Delilah Urea rents a red SUV through Goldfinger's account with a car rental company in Camarillo, California. Jose Moya picks up the vehicle at the car rental company's office. Goldfinger originally rented the vehicle under the auspices of using it for James Fayed's nephew, and he also worked at Goldfinger, family business. But after he got his own car, Jose Moya began driving the rented SUV. Remember the red SUV. So on July 28th, Delilah Urea gets word that Goldfinger is going to close early that day. So she leaves work and she goes home and finds the Fayed's older daughter, Desiree, visiting with her daughter. And she thought at some point Pamela's going to come by and pick up her daughter. And Pamela never picks up her daughter. And Desiree ends up staying with Delilah Urea, the employee of Goldfinger, for a couple of days. She also gets a message telling her that they would be closed on July 29th, the day after, and that she would be sent a message if she was ever to return to work again. And she never gets another message. So her job is over, and the company is over, because of what James Fayed wanted to do to keep all of his money.
Wow. He did all that, right? So it's like, oh my God, what a dope.
Well, he had Delilah rent the SUV so he wouldn't be connected. He had her allow, employees of the company use the SUV so it's not connected to him. He's retarded in the fact that he doesn't understand he is the company and the money paid for those things are going to be traced back to him.
Right. And he closes down the company on the day his wife is killed.
We closes early, and then the following day he's like, no one can come back to work. We don't really have a company anymore.
Okay.
So at 1 o'clock on July 28th, a driver of a limousine company picks up James Fayed and his sister in Moore Park and drives them to Century City for a meeting with the family law attorneys. They are dropped off at 2:30. The driver parks and waits. And 3 or 4 hours later, so we're talking 5:30 or 6, which is what we think happened, James Fayed calls the driver and picks him up and takes him back to Moore Park. So Pamela had met her attorney at 3 o'clock in Century City. She went to the meeting at the office of their family law attorney. And after the meeting, she says goodbye to her attorney. She went to her car in the parking structure, and we know what happens next. Now, Dateline was the first place to show the most amazing 10, 15 seconds of video I've ever seen in my life. If you want to be a hard-ass murderer who contracts someone to kill your wife because she's going to divorce you and give you up to the feds because you're a pile of shit, probably act like you don't know what's happening. You should act like everyone else.
That's usually the way you're supposed to do it.
It is stunning, this piece of video. So God bless this office building, office towers, for having pretty good video. I know at one point there was some talk about security not being good enough, but I'm telling you what, for 2008, I think there's so much information gathered from the security of the building that I don't know.
Oh, the LAPD thanked us. There was great. The video coverage is what helped them solve the case.
Amazingly so. Amazingly so, Mark. I mean, so on Dateline, there was a video from outside the building. There was a courtyard between the towers and, some trees with some benches around them and, places to sit and drink coffee or whatever. And there is, I'm going to say, 20 people milling around. One guy has one big fat guy has his briefcase on a bench and is looking at his phone or something. And people are, it's closing time. People are leaving their office. No one's in a hurry. They're moving slowly, walking back and forth. And there isn't audio, but when you see everyone save one fat guy with his briefcase turn to their left and move toward the screams, that's pretty interesting shit right there.
Yeah, you can see everybody. Everybody in the courtyard is looking up at the parking garage and walking over there
toward their left and starts to move. And as there's more screams, you see them move quicker. People are moving faster, and one guy doesn't look up. Does not look up.
One lonely guy standing there smoking a cigarette.
Oh, smoking. I thought he was looking at his phone. You're right. He's smoking. Standing outside on the plaza, smoking and not registering anything. And who do you think that man is?
And remember, folks, everybody of those people that were interviewed, that were walking, they're all saying all they could hear were these blood-curdling screams. Okay, so there's blood-curdling screams going on.
And no. A lot of no, screaming. Yeah. Guess who that guy smoking the cigarette is? It's not the Marlboro Man.
I'm going to let the audience figure that one out.
Yes, kids, it's James Fayed. So everyone else is surprised and shocked as to what's happening, don't know why there's screams, and James Fayed's like, I'm just going to sit here and wait for my limo driver to pick me up. Okay, bye-bye. Bye, Century City. Gets in his limo and leaves. Gets in his limo and leaves.
That's not just brass balls. That's just a brass brain, because that's the stupidest thing that I've ever seen a murderer do. We see some stupid shit on these cases. That's the stupidest thing I've ever seen.
And later on, in a jailhouse taped conversation with his cellie, James Fayed says, I gave them so many opportunities to do this job. I had scoped out many opportunities that could have done this where there were no cameras, and this is the time they pick in LA when everyone's watching and there are cameras everywhere. He says this to his cellmate. God. He had tried to kill her at a outdoor party on July 3rd.
Really?
Yeah,
I hadn't heard this.
In Malibu. He'd given them 2 other opportunities to do it. Here's where we're going to be. There's no cameras. Do it here. They don't. I don't know what the second opportunity was, but they don't do it. I don't know if they picked, he didn't want to know the details. And you'll see it's been handed off so many times. It literally is like, the Three Stooges. We'll just call them the Three Stooges. So back to the crime scene. Detective Eric Spear, the one in the fedora who I just adore, who's like, hey, that's good enough for me. You're Mark Humphrey's wife. You get in here, girl. He was just awesome. And I also have to say, what a brilliant man. And I don't know how I got access to this, except that I knew Mark. They were reviewing the videotape, and we saw the murderer struggling with the key card. When you go into a parking structure, you either work there and you have an electronic key card, or you have a piece of paper ticket that allows you to enter and exit. And I got to look over the shoulder of this amazing homicide detective as he was reviewing the video in the parking structure. And we saw him struggling. We saw the killer in the hoodie, in a black hoodie and a red SUV, struggling with his ticket to get out. He was nervous because, he just killed a woman for no reason for a couple $1,000, because he's the third one down the line. And he's 22. He was trying to put his paper ticket in through the electronic key card part, and it wasn't working. He was struggling. And when Detective Spear reviewed the video further, and he went backward, he found out that he had entered the parking garage at 3:02 and was attempting to leave, kind of badly. So Detective Spear responds to the 3rd floor of the parking structure to investigate the murder. Officers and investigators on the scene have taken photographs. They've placed markers to indicate the blood on the ground, the antenna, the wheel of the red car that was next to her black SUV, the railing. Pamela's body's already been removed, and Detective Spear observes Pamela's black SUV that's parked next to a red car that's not involved. There's her blood-covered purse is on the ground, and he sees criminalists taking all the swabs of the blood. The parking structure had a video surveillance system, which, thank you, Mark, with cameras at the first 2 floor entrances and the exits. One of the entrance and exit had no attendant and required a key card. The other entrance and exit required visitors to obtain a ticket to enter and to pay the attendant the amount indicated by the ticket when leaving. So Detective Spear learned that the suspect vehicle was a red SUV with a male driver and a hoodie, and he left the parking structure soon after 6:30. So she really wasn't even killed until much later, probably between 6 and 6:30. So Detective Spear reviews the videos from the surveillance system and observed that only the red SUV left during the pretty relevant time period. Everyone else was locked down. And he was suspicious of the vehicle because the driver was unsuccessful in attempting to leave through the key card exit. the driver is trying to manipulate the parking ticket against the key card reader, and he's doing. I remember that's the only part I saw of that video is him. Do you remember that, Mark?
Yep.
Yeah.
He thought he didn't understand how it worked.
Right.
That there's a visitor exit and a tenant exit.
Yes.
He thought he went through the tenant exit.
Yes.
Yeah.
And do you remember him getting out of the car?
No.
I do. That's the only part I remember is because you could see the black hoodie. He got out of, and Detective Spear, not all of these videos are like watching, your own system at home. They're blurry. They're not, they're not all great. Detective Spear was like, that looks like him. That looks like him. He was amazing. And he was like on it. And I'm looking over his shoulder like, holy shit, we're watching this. And this is happening. This guy, tall, thin, black hoodie, had to open the SUV door and put his, left arm and leg out and was attempting to put that ticket up. And he was trying, and he's very nervous, and he's trying, and I don't remember what happened, but he finally got the gate to open. It was really, to me, that was fascinating. And he sees this driver getting out of the vehicle, and he was able to capture a still photo from the video that shows the silhouette. So you could kind of see the height and, the thin body and the hoodie. It's pretty fascinating. Pretty fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it was very compelling, and it was. They're able to catch these people really quick because of how stupid they were.
Exactly, the stupidity is large in these ones. It's really large. So, I guess the next clip would be Detective Warren Porsche from LAPD, and he is entering the Fayed compound to tell James Fayed that his wife has died. So can you hit clip 2, producer Mark?
When we pulled up to the ranch in Moore Park, it was very secluded, but it was a very beautiful ranch as well. The house was very well kept, very nice home. So when we went there and met with Mr. Fayed, he was very mild-mannered. Mr. Fayed had 2 safes on his property. He had 1 safe in his home, was quite a bit of guns in that safe primarily. And just down the hill on his property, Jose Moya, his ranch hand, had a smaller residence there, and there was also a pretty large safe at Mr. Moya's residence as well. We were shocked to find in his safe it was full of gold bullion, gold coins, and gold bars.
Aha!
Oh ho!
Aha!
Eehee.
So, Simpleton Me thinks Pamela Fayed ends up being murdered in the parking structure of her divorce attorney's office. James Fayed's a dick who doesn't want her to leave him. No, that's not it. James Fayed's a dick, all right, but he was under a federal investigation by the FBI and the IRS. And they were and they were investigating Goldfinger for illegal money transactions in connection with 2 different Ponzi schemes. So in February of 2008, Assistant United States Attorney Mark Avias sought an indictment against Goldfinger and Fayed. When he found out that Pamela was, in process of divorcing James, he'd really hoped to use that as leverage to get permission to use an FBI undercover investigation to trap them. And they end up recruiting Pamela on their side, and she's going to come clean. And somehow James Fayed figured out she's working with the feds.
Uh-oh.
Yep. So Pamela's attorney had contacted Agent Avias and said she's willing to cooperate with the, investigation of the Goldfinger's illegal money transmitting business. But Pamela's murdered before he can have a meeting with her.
Isn't that convenient?
So weird, huh?
Kind of strange.
So strange. So the mistakes keep mounting. Shortly after the murder, Jose Moya asks another employee of Goldfinger to help him return the SUV to the rental car company in Camarillo. So Moya drives the SUV while this other employee follows in his car. He left the SUV at a car wash, and then he and the other employee ran some errands. A few hours later, they return to the car wash. He picks up the SUV. The other employee follows him to the rental car office. It had already closed, so he leaves the keys in the night drop-off box. It's like, oh, I'm returning my car. Don't worry about the blood and the shit, and some shit.
Some shit.
Yeah. So this other employee said, well, no, it wasn't unusual for Jose Moya to ask me to help him return, a car. They rent, cars all the time for Goldfinger and for the Fayed Ranch. I mean, a lot of the roads on the ranch are dirt roads and rented vehicles get dirty. So that's not really a big issue, that I had to follow him to return this car. But the manager of the rental car company was like, how often do you get an SUV that someone's rented returned that has been detailed and is in absolutely new condition?
He's just being very nice.
Jose Moya is such a giver.
Just a generous motherfucker.
Thoughtful, generous motherfucker. Wow, I don't ever hear you say motherfucker. I love that. That makes me so happy.
Well, I'm kind of pissed at old James at the moment.
Jose?
No, and Jose.
Oh, and James.
Yeah.
There's so many people. It gets worse. So police notified the manager of the rental car company in Camarillo, and they're like, look, did you happen to rent a red SUV to anyone? Why, yes, I did. I did. And you know what? I got it back in detailed, pristine condition. Huh. Yeah, you can have this one. Yeah, you can check this out. Asshole. So it turns out that if you want something done, you should probably fucking do it yourself. And if it gets fucked up, you face the consequences, as opposed to handing down your dirty work three layers down. So James Fayed pays Jose Moya $26,000 to kill his wife. Jose Moya, I guess, can't find it in himself since Pamela Fayed has been so good to him. So he contracts for $10,000 his niece's boyfriend, Gabriel Marquez. And Gabriel Marquez is like, I don't need 10 grand. I'll get by with 6. And so Gabriel Marquez contracts his nephew, Stephen Simmons, for $4,000.
Good grief. What's really strange is it's like this strange Christmas tree, family tree kind of thing.
It is.
Good grief.
It's really awful. And 22-year-old Stephen Simmons shows up on July 28th wearing a hoodie and a red SUV rented by Goldfinger Industries and stabs Pamela Fayed 13 times, including almost cutting her motherfucking head off, and has a hard time getting out of the parking garage because he doesn't know how things like that work.
He's probably never been to Century City in his life up until then.
Apparently he had been brought up from Mexico.
This whole thing is it would be hilarious if it weren't
so
sad.
Awful.
Yeah.
I just imagine James Fayed like, okay, Jose's taking care of this for me. And I remember, I imagine Joey saying, oh, okay, Gabriel's taking care of this for me. And then I guess Gabriel's like, oh, thank God I got $6,000. And, Stephen Simmons, my nephew from Mexico, is getting $4,000 off this woman. This is great. This is awesome. My hands are clean.
Yeah, free money for everybody except for the poor Steve.
Yeah, well, poor Steve. So after looking at the video, because he got out of the car, I swear to God, that's what, he's 6'4". He's tall and thin and 6'4". Gabriel Marquez is 5'8". It was easy to figure out it wasn't Gabriel Marquez.
Yeah, right.
And it was easy to figure out it wasn't Jose Moya. But it was a fascinating trail to finally get that it was, the nephew of the cousin of the brother of the man from Moore Park. It was just an awful, game, the telephone game. It's just terrible. So a jury convicts Jose Moya, Gabriel Marquez, and Stephen Simmons for first-degree murder. Now, they also convict James Fayed because they added the lying in wait. That's what made it a death penalty case. The other three are sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. And James Fayed is sentenced to death because of the mastermind lying in wait, situation, which, that's what I'm saying. I guess, do it yourself, or I don't know, or pay more money. I don't know. So James Fayed, I don't want to tell you what to do on how to kill people because that's probably not what we're here for.
We don't want the cops listening in on that part of this.
No, we don't. And I'm never really telling people how to kill people. You're going to do what you're going to do. I can't tell you what to do or not do. But this is just, it's so remarkably sad. And it literally couldn't be more fucked up. And I couldn't have more respect for the LAPD homicide detectives and everyone who was involved in this because, how layered is this? So just to make things even better, while James Fayed is in jail, his cellie, Sean Smith, tapes a conversation that he has with James Fayed, where James Fayed tells him he needs to take care of some people for him.
Oh, now you're kidding.
No, so he tries to contract his cellie to kill Jose Moya, Gabriel Marquez, and Stephen Simmons.
Jeez.
And when Sean Scott says, well, how much did you pay him to kill your wife? And he's like, too much, 25. So 26,000 was taken out of the bank and given to Robert Brooks to give to Jose Moya. But the extra 1,000 was probably just like fun money, pin money.
Yeah, walking around money.
Yeah. So whatever you needed, yeah. So it isn't like they are criminal masterminds faux show, because James Fayed's cellie turns the recordings over to the police and says, look, he wanted me to take care of this. And James Fayed, says, I really appreciate you doing this. You've really lifted a big burden off my shoulders. So he would now be,
Let's hope please tell me that he is at least going to stay in jail for the rest of his life.
Well, believe it or not, this is still going on 10 years later. 10 years later, there are court appearances coming up in September and November on several different things. On the recordings about, trying to knock off the people who did such a bad job.
They're trying to exclude those now or something?
Yes. And then there is his attorney is trying to get the ruling overturned, saying that the jurors were exposed to things that were hearsay. So I have to say, even though she's gone, Pamela Fayed has people still fighting for her. The jury foreman, last name Pritchard, showed up at several of James Fayed's court appearances to dispute anything that he heard that was not correct. And he's like, look, even if James Fayed did not, the tapes that we heard were not the deciding factor. The fingerprint of Steve Simmons on the exit ticket, Pamela's blood on the rented SUV that Jose Moya rented and was driving, those things were, what really helped us come to our decision. And he says, whether James Fayed was the one or not the one who plunged the knife into Pam, That's not relevant. Without him, these other 3 people would not have been in Century City at the parking lot and waiting to kill a woman that they had no reason to kill.
Precisely. And I think it's just wonderful. This is a the foreman, you said?
Yeah, jury foreman.
Well, you don't see that very often
No, you
with
don't.
jurors. I mean, that's
what I'm saying. He wants to make sure that this conviction stands. And so that's what I'm saying. Even though she's gone, Pamela has inspired people to still stand up for those that have been wronged and so badly wronged. So badly wronged. It's, there's such a huge amount of evidence from Sprint cell phone records that show that, the conversations the time of the conversations between Gabriel Marquez and Stephen Simmons as he's driving from Century City on the 405, AT&T cell phone records showing, Gabriel Marquez calling in Oxnard and then Simi Valley and then along the 405 going to Century City to make sure his, nephew did the right job, got the right one. I mean, there's plenty of evidence, but not even just the blood and the fingerprints and the video that connect all of these horrible Three Stooges together. It's just amazing that you're right, that the jury foreman is like, no, we're going to I want to show up and make sure anything that James Fayed's defense attorney puts out there that's wrong, I want it noted that it's wrong.
Well, God bless him.
It's a beautiful thing, and it just shows you someone like Pamela Fayed, who brings in someone that she meets on the street, trying to make their life better, share her good fortune and her wealth, and do what's right, come forward to the feds and say, this is what is happening that's illegal, and I want to come clean and get this taken care of. She has people fighting for her after her death to make sure that conviction stands. And more cowbell.
And remember, our phone number, 832-TIPSTER, 832-847-7837. Our email, jttipsters@gmail.com.